Good afternoon. My name is Alex Elbywood and I work for the Growth Company Organisational Improvement. The Growth Company itself supports the economic development of the local communities in which we serve. There's 13 different business units within Growth Company. Myself is one of those business units with our unique expertise and experience in leadership effectiveness and cultural change. And well-being is a big part of that, and that's what the talk on that we're going to do today. Okay? So, just to get you going, my clicker doesn't work. No? Okay. Sack that off. Just to get you going, on a Tuesday afternoon, a couple of statistics for you. 82,000 is the number of working hours that the average person will do in their lifetime. And 4% is the amount of time that you will spend with family and friends above and beyond your colleagues. Scary statistics. But with those statistics, surely, the place that we work, we should be finding happiness and contentment if we're spending that amount of time at work with colleagues. But what we know is that isn't always the case. Certainly in terms of working hours, they're on the increase, which is affecting our well-being. Technology, whilst it's brought great agility and flexibility to our working day, it's also actually 9 out of 10 people have suggested that it's stopping them from switching off on a day as well. So that's affecting our well-being too. A survey last year suggested that 6 out of 10 people suggested that work was the main cause of stress in their life. And in the same year, 51% of organisations identified an increase in mental health issues in their employee base, and a third recognised an increase in stress. So the situation is getting worse within the workplace, and organisations are responding to that by implementing workplace wellbeing programmes. But unfortunately, those programmes are failing to address behaviours and attitudes within the workplace, and we see that because absenteeism rates are on the increase. So whilst we recognise that organisations absolutely have a part to play in supporting workplace wellbeing, that can't be a substitute for personal responsibility. And that's what we're going to look at today. So to get us going, what I'd like to do is look at your well-being as it is today. Can I ask everybody to stand up? And I only want you to sit down if you can't respond positively to the question that's posed. Okay. So, in the last 14 days, have you spent at least 1 hour a day doing something that makes you happy? If you've done it. Oh, wonder. You got me scared then. Nearly lost somebody already. Okay, next question. In the last 14 days, have you had 7 hours sleep each and every night? We always lose a few there. In the last 14 days, have you undertaken 5 hours of exercise per week? No, you can't. You've already sat down. In the last 14 days, have you eaten junk food on at least 2 occasions? In the last 14 days, have you drunk less than 14 units of alcohol per week? We've still got a few. In the last 14 days, have you spent time with people that make you laugh, cry, think and feel? In the last 14 days, have you discussed a stress-related issue with a friend or colleague? In the last 14 days, have you learnt something new? You're still there. Oh no, we lost you. Last question. In the last 14 days, have you achieved something that gives you meaning? Perfect. 2 people. That's wonderful. I did a presentation the other day with 150, and at the end of 9 questions, we had 1 person standing. Just to give you a flavour of where your well-being is at. So at this point, what I'd like to ask the question is a very deep and meaningful question. How content are you with your life as a whole? And I'd like to say at this point, it isn't for anybody. Putting aside children and vulnerable adults, it isn't for anybody to define what health and happiness looks like. It's absolutely for the individual to define health and happiness for themselves. So it's not me stood here and saying, this is a picture of health and happiness. It's absolutely for the individual to define that for themselves. So I ask the question again, how content are you with your life as a whole at this moment in time? A really deep question that's sometimes quite difficult to answer. So I work with organisations, we help them to go through this by identifying 6 components of well-being. On your seats, there's a card which shows a wheel which contains these 6 components. You can use this card as we go through the rest of the presentation to identify where your current well-being is currently at and where you would like your well-being to be. So if you can imagine, in terms of the centre being 0 and the outer ring being 10, you can identify on the wheel with a simple line of where you would like your well-being to be and where it is currently at as we go through that presentation. And it's something that you can take away and reflect on in terms of what your priorities look like. So if we take the first component in terms of physical well-being, this goes above and beyond exercise, albeit exercise is incredibly important for our physical well-being, but we also need to look at other component parts such as nutrition and sleep. So as individuals, how much do we know about the foods that we are consuming and its impact on our body? In terms of the foods that we can eat that causes stress or indeed boosts our mood, do we really appreciate how much protein we should be eating at breakfast to maintain energy levels throughout the day? Do we really appreciate the impact of dehydration on our mood levels? The list is endless. But what we're trying to do is encourage organisations to move away from providing a bowl of fruit and trying to teach people to eat apples, to educating them to understand what I consume today, yesterday, the week before, how all of that influences by biometrics. What is the response that my body gives to the things that I consume on a day-to-day basis? Therefore, if we educate individuals, they can make an educated decision on the things that they do on a day-to-day basis. Incredibly important for our physical well-being. In terms of intellectual well-being, this is based on the statement of every day is a school day. Research suggests that learning on a day-to-day basis, stimulating our thoughts, our mind, is incredibly important for our well-being. This doesn't have to be a formal qualification. It can be other experiences, other opportunities where we bring learning into our life. In fact, an organisation that we're currently working with has started to do lunchtime learning sessions, but with volunteers around the organisation who have a passion and an interest in a particular hobby. So they're bringing that love and passion to their colleagues and sharing things like cooking, musical instruments, books that they read, an opportunity to share and learn, develop and stimulate people's thinking, developing social networks within the organisation, and the general well-being and health of people within that business. So there is other opportunities that we can bring learning into our lives. It doesn't have to be that formal qualification, but research suggests that people that learn on a regular basis are more stimulated, more motivated, have a passion for life and learning. It would be remiss of me to pass on intellectual well-being without commenting on technology. We've already recognised that technology has brought brilliant opportunities in terms of the amount of knowledge and data that's at our fingertips now. But with that, it is also having a detrimental effect on our intellect. Research suggests that technology, smartphones in particular, is affecting our brain capacity, our concentration, and even our social interactions with individuals. A recent study that took two groups of people, with one group that had their phones in front of them during a test, and another group of people that had those phones tucked away, demonstrated that the individuals that had their phones with them during the test had a 10% less IQ response to that test. The thinking behind that is that our brain subconsciously is actively thinking about your phone on a constant basis. So all of your energy and time is thinking about what's happening with your social media, with your technology, rather than concentrating on the task in hand. So a question that I'd like to pose is to get you to think about, when we think about our intellectual well-being, how is technology influencing that? And what are the changes that you could make in your life to find that balance? In terms of social well-being, we've already touched on that, but it's important to say that everybody's social well-being is totally different from the person next to you. What we need from relationships is very different for one another. But it's really important to recognise that our social well-being doesn't end and start with our family and friends. We've already recognised the fact that we spend a lot of time in terms of our work and with colleagues, and therefore we need to have and recognise social well-being within the workplace. Whatever that you need, whatever those professional relationships look like, I would again encourage you to think about, what is my social well-being in the context of my work? Am I getting that stimulus from my colleagues and the people that I work with? And if not, what are the changes that I need to make? The fourth area is spiritual well-being. My favourite well-being, if you can have a favourite well-being, if that's not too geeky. But this isn't about religious preference. This is about finding our meaning, our purpose in life. What is the reason we get out of bed on a day-to-day basis? Why are we here? Why do we exist? What are our values, and are we truly living by those values? This doesn't need to be saving the planet. It doesn't need to be saving the people of the world. It could be as basic as being the best person you can possibly be to your friends and family. But again, research suggests that finding that meaning, finding that purpose in life is incredibly important to human beings. And when we find that purpose, again, we are more motivated and stimulated and engaged with wanting to do things on a day-to-day basis, all of which are linked to our well-being. Occupational well-being, absolutely something that I believe most of us are trying to seek, that balance between our work and our life. So again, I would pose the question to you. How is it, in terms of the amount of stress that you feel within the workplace versus the amount of satisfaction and reward that you get from the work that you do? That's probably not a question that you could answer today, but certainly an important question that you need to reflect on. Having that balance between the stress that you get and the reward and the satisfaction from doing the work that you're doing. And finally, emotional well-being. Not to be confused with mental health. In its very basic terms, mental health is the process in which we process information in front of us. Emotional well-being is our emotional response to that information. So we do a lot of work with organisations around seeking emotional well-being and a balance within that emotional well-being. That looks at, in terms of confidence and people's positive thinking. It looks at managing our inner chimp. and our frustrations that sometimes can come out. But incredibly important, managing stress and resilience and how we cope and recover from those situations. And understanding resilience is incredibly important to our emotional well-being. We're often presented with very extreme stories of resilience, where people have faced prolific challenges within their life. And whilst those stories are incredibly powerful, sometimes we struggle to actually relate to those stories because their worlds are totally different to ours. So what I'd like you to do is encourage you to look at the resilience around us in terms of family, friends, neighbours, colleagues, and you'll be amazed to see the amount of resilience that people have. But understanding and learning from that resilience, those traits that those people hold, helps us to actually reflect on the challenges that we have and the strength that we find when we're faced with those challenges as well. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Jeff's story. Jeff is a normal working man, born in 1932 to an RAF pilot and a factory worker. Originally based in Bristol, the first challenge that Jeff faced was an 8-year-old. During the war, they used to use a crypt as a bomb shelter, and that crypt took a direct hit. And unfortunately, Jeff experienced the death of friends and family around him. At that point, they were relocated to the northwest, where Jeff's dad went to war and unfortunately didn't come back. So was left with his mum and his brother in post-war Britain. To manage the finances of the house, Jeff's mum had to go out and get a second job, so she worked during the day and during the night. And this is the point where Jeff said he learnt to cook, because if you didn't cook, you didn't eat. So it's a stumbling block that you have to get over. In the late 1940s, as a keen sportsman and had played for Blackpool schoolboys, he got offered a scholarship with Blackpool Football Club, a dream job in terms of in his eyes. But unfortunately, due to the family finances, he had to give up that opportunity and go out to work. So instead, he became a messenger boy for Royal Mail. Not quite the same, but unfortunately, a challenge that you have to get over. In the 1950s, Jeff met Marilyn. They got married. They had a little girl. After 3 years, Jeff came back to an empty house and a note to say that Marilyn had unfortunately left and gone back to her mum's. In the 1960s, Jeff met Anne. Again, fell in love. They got married, and soon Anne got pregnant. But unfortunately, during that pregnancy, Anne was diagnosed with breast cancer. So the treatment started, and unfortunately, the little boy was born premature. After 3 days, the little boy, Julian, unfortunately died. And Jeff says that the hardest day of his life was registering the death and the birth of his child on the same day. Anne went into remission, thankfully, and became pregnant again, which was great news. During the pregnancy, unfortunately, the cancer came back. At this point, Anne decided that she wasn't going to go through treatment. She wanted to give Jeff a baby, and therefore her choice was to not have treatment this time. The little boy was born, healthy, albeit early, but he was strong and survived. Unfortunately, 3 months after, Anne died at the tender age of 28. That left Jeff as a single parent bringing up his son. In the 1970s, Jeff met Zena. Zena adopted the little boy, went on to have 2 more children, and life was good for a while until the final challenge hit the family. And that was in 1985 in the form of a Philippa. And Philippa was born with Down syndrome. a condition that the family had no information, no knowledge about whatsoever. And rather than crumbling and not dealing with that situation, Jeff became a keen advocate for disabled people rights at work. And I believe that's still a policy that Royal Mail hold dear today. So the reason why I tell you that story, and by the way, this guy is a very happy, content man. But the reason why I tell you is that although he would like to believe it, he is not unique. He is not different. These stories exist time and time again in the people that surround us. And we need to learn from the strength that they have on what resilience looks like. The fact of the matter is that life throws shit sometimes. And we have to find the strength to be able to deal with that. And from these stories we can learn what does that actually look like. I work with individuals, sorry, I'm on the back end of a chest infection, hence why my voice is going, apologies. I work with individuals, we have identified 5 key areas on what resilience looks like. The first one is an absolute acceptance that life will have its ups and downs. That is what life is about, and as long as we can accept that, we can start to deal with it. These individuals also have a very strong thought around gratitude and being grateful for the things that they have rather than the things that they haven't. They also have a very strong positive attitude. They think about the future rather than dwelling on the past. They also have incredible inner strength. Stubbornness, some people would argue, but absolute inner strength to find the things that they need to do to make those steps forward. And having an external focus in terms of what that goal or aspiration is. Where do I need to be? And what are the steps that I need to take? And finally, focusing on the things that you absolutely can control. There is no point spending energy on the things that you can't. And therefore, focusing your time and energy on the things that you can will bring you great positivity and resilience. I'd like to finish the presentation on 8 tips that we've got in terms of finding our balance. The first one is do something every day that makes you smile. Be mindful of your lifestyle choices and how that influences your mood and your energy. Absolutely spend time with people that make you laugh, cry, think and feel. Strive every day to make it a school day. Find your purpose and live by those values that make you you. And find one thing a day which you are grateful for. Absolutely give in terms of whatever makes you happy. And finally, be active in your body, mind and soul. That is the programme that we work on to build people's well-being and help them find their balance. I hope today has brought you food for thought. I'd like to end on a quote from the words of Albert Camus. Life is a sum of all your choices. So what is it that you are doing today? If you found today interesting and you would like to talk some more, we're on stand H36 where we'd love to have a chat. Thank you very much for your time.